Behind the Game. This is a sports show, but it's really not about sports. At least it's not about the action that takes place on the field, the court, or the ice. It's really about what happens behind the scenes and the influential people, the owners, the agents, the administrators, the promoters who help shape the way that we watch and enjoy sports. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Game. I'm Patrick Klinger. To my left is my co-host, my dear friend, and the Commissioner of the Western Collegiate Hockey Association, Bill Robertson. And Bill, how are you?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Thanks, Patrick.
Perfect.
Our guest today is a established and esteemed guest in the hockey world, Mr. Tom Chorske, native of Minneapolis, Minnesota, longtime NHL player, played with the Gophers, played at the high school level in the state of Minnesota. He was a Stanley Cup champion with the New Jersey Devils. He's right now doing a lot of broadcasting on Fox Sports North. And most importantly right now for Tom, he's a hockey dad. So we welcome you to the show today, Tom.
Hey, thanks, Bill. Thanks, Patrick.
I think the first question, we want to get right into this for our viewers out there. You played 11 plus years in the NHL, and now you're an analyst on Fox Sports North doing the studio show, but also sometimes doing the analysis work up in the booth. Is it hard for you these days, after you played the game for so many years, to criticize or see things that you don't like on the ice and then report on them?
It really is, partly because, as you mentioned, as a player, you understand that there's possibly other things going on in a player's life that maybe you're not accounting for that could be affecting the player. Also, in this day and age with social media, you've got critics that are able to publicly criticize the job that you're doing, and so you try to balance the integrity of your, I think, analysis of the game or how a player's playing or how the team's playing, and you don't want to, compromise that by being too favorable, but at the same time, your background as a player, you understand, hey, there's a lot of other things that could be weighing on that player's mind or going into the fact that they're not playing on top of their game.
Tom, you were the very first Mr. Hockey in Minnesota, and you received the trophy from Herb Brooks, legendary coach. That must have been a surreal moment.
Yeah, it was 1985, and not that long after the 1980 Miracle on Ice, and so Herb Brooks was clearly, an iconic coach that I couldn't believe was at this event, which was great. But John Mariucci was also there. Larry Ross, who's a legendary coach from the International Falls, was also there at the table. So it was a pretty esteemed head table that I was honored to be around, and just being so impressionable at age 13 or so when they won the gold medal, and then having Herb Brooks stand up and speak at the Mr. Hockey banquet and then present the award to me makes it all that more special these days, I think.
Well, you were one of the last great players in basically the city conference in Minneapolis, at Minneapolis Southwest, which had a steep tradition in high school hockey over the years, and you have played in many big amateur games as a high school player. Maybe you can talk about that, and there are bigger programs that were around that you played against, and yet Minneapolis Southwest every year seemed to be in the tournament or could be close to competing against anybody in the state of Minnesota.
Yeah, there was a rich tradition there. Their coach Dave Peterson for a long time had things cooking really well with the Southwest Indians. I should mention I went one year to Minneapolis West, and they were the Cowboys in South Minneapolis and Uptown, and any of the old Westies would be mad if I didn't qualify myself as having gone there. But I'm proud of that too. I had a great hockey coach and mentor there in Coach Jim Baxter. But Southwest, yeah, perennially had good hockey, would get to the state tournament. Right about the time I arrived, they realigned the sections and put us in the same section with the Bloomington, Jefferson, and Kennedy schools, and that became a pretty tough hurdle for us because Bloomington was growing, leaps and bounds, and a lot of hockey families were moving there, and so I was unable to get over that hump and get to the state tournament. Southwest had made a lot of appearances over the years, but when I went there, we ran into some tough Bloomington school teams and never quite got there.
Hockey within the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul really seems to have waned. It's
You don't have powerhouses coming out of the metro area unless it's the suburbs.
Or the private schools.
Or the private schools, exactly. Why do you think that is?
You know, I think it's demographics obviously play a role into it, and just as when I was in high school, the Bloomington schools were so powerful and strong, they're not really that strong either. So there's these cycles of suburbans or communities that grow, and then they become empty nesters, and then that community doesn't have a lot of hockey players, I think, signing up and growing up through the system. And so in the city, the same thing kind of happened. There was a turnover and a change in demographics, and you know, at the time, one of the best high school games I ever played in was they used to have the Twin City Championship, and it was Southwest versus, one year it was St. Thomas Academy, and another year it was St. Paul Johnson at the old Aldridge Arena, and you know, people were hanging from the rafters. It was such a big game. But you know, back to your point, the demographics change, kids grow up, and communities become empty nester communities for a while, until that next influx of families move in.
Well, besides being a great hockey player coming from Minneapolis, I didn't realize that you were a star quarterback at Southwest. I didn't know that football was in your blood, but I've heard great things about that storied career. Did you ever think about playing another sport at an elite level, like football or maybe baseball or something else?
Well, I played baseball growing up as well. I never was real good at baseball, but you know, football was something I really liked and played pretty enthusiastically, and I was all conference in my junior year and quarterback at Southwest, and at that point I was starting to think that maybe I could play some football, but the only interest was from smaller schools, and hockey was still my true passion, and I was really excelling, you know, at that time in hockey as well. So by the time I was a senior, I knew that my path was going to be hockey. I was getting, you know, I guess indications that I was going to be drafted into the NHL after my senior year, and so I pretty much knew that hockey was the path for me.
Good choice.
It worked out.
Tom, you have this incredibly storied high school career. You won a Stanley Cup, but you never had a chance to play in the Minnesota State High School hockey tournament.
No.
Knowing how special that tournament is in this state, is that something that's a lingering disappointment for you?
It was until last year. I got to live vicariously through my kids. I have a daughter that plays and a son that plays, and they both fortunately got to play in the state tournament. So I was able to see them both in back-to-back tournaments, and the girls team went on to win it. They both play in Edina, and the Edina girls team won it for the second time in a row. So I was lucky enough to watch our daughter play and win a championship, and then our son participated as well, and they won the first game, and then he got hurt in the second game. So it was a little bit of bittersweetness to it, but nonetheless got to see him score a goal in the state tournament, and so not dwelling on my own failures anymore, and just living vicariously through my kids, I guess.
Well, we just talked about your career as a quarterback and then playing hockey and baseball. In today's society, and you and I have had this conversation before offline, and I'm a big believer that playing multi-sports, as I believe Patrick is best if you're going to be able to do that at a younger level, to see what you like and to take some pressure off. What do you think about today's society where kids are focused, and in particular hockey gets a lot, but now it really is spread into pretty much all sports at the high school level. It's such an individual thing where you play one sport year-round. Tell me your thoughts and philosophy on all that.
Well, having been through it a little bit, we always encouraged our kids to play lots of different sports, and there was lacrosse and soccer and football, and they all do play hockey, and but they've continued to play soccer as well. My philosophy on it is, I'll go back to, well, first, why I think it happens is because there's now more specialized coaches, and there's academies or there's clinics that people can make money from, and they definitely are experts, and they can help a student or a young athlete, you know, excel in a certain sport and kind of teach them and train them the way pro athletes get taught. So it's all kind of moved down, so that's what's driving it a little bit. But you know, I think back of Herb Brooks, who was, before he passed away, used to preach, we got to build the base. We got to build the base if we want to get the best hockey players. And also to get the best hockey players, we want the best athletes. We just need really athletic people, because the better the athlete, the better a hockey player he will be, right? Because they'll just be faster and stronger, or whatever attributes they have. You know, the bigger the base. And so what people should really try and do is let their kids play as many sports as they can and become very athletic. And we see repetitive injuries as well as something that's a byproduct of playing the same sport all the time. It's the same repetitive motions that they're running through, and their bodies don't react well when they're adolescent going through that type of activity. So there's injuries, back injuries, knee injuries, that result from that type of path, if you will. So, you know, if you want your son or daughter to be a good athlete and maybe have success, make them good athletes as long as you can. And then as they get older, I think they can focus on a sport. But at the same time, you can be doing other things, maybe at a recreational level, not as at an elite level or as a committed level. So there's a way to do it. There's a way to excel at one sport or focus on one sport, but you should be playing other sports recreationally, whether it's tennis or soccer or, you know, some other sport that you enjoy doing and can do at the same time while maybe you're a little more hyper-focused on your main sport.
We mentioned Herb Brooks a couple of times. Probably the most legendary hockey coach ever. You know, Miracle on Ice, he's got a statue of himself outside.
Certainly around here, yes.
And you played for him twice.
Yep.
You know, he was known as a coach that pushed his players to the brink. And I don't know if you know, all of that is myth or there's a lot of reality to it, but you can share some of your stories of playing with Herb.
Yeah, well, you can imagine we just talked about the Mr. Hockey presentation. And as you said, pushing athletes to their brink or to their, you know, to what they're capable of doing or beyond. When he was hired as the coach in New Jersey, he skated up to me. So now this is in '92, so it's 7 years later. I've gone to college and I've now played in the NHL for 3 or 4 seasons, I think. He skated up to me in the first practice. I hadn't talked to him at all. And he said, "Chorske, I've been watching you my whole life, and you better start playing a heck of a lot better if you're going to play for me." And he skated away. And I was completely devastated, because I thought, they just hired Herb Brooks. He's going to love me. I'm from Minnesota. I can skate like the wind. I can play his system. It's going to be awesome. And he skated up to me and said, "Not so fast." And because he probably knew that he could maybe push me a little harder. And so it wasn't an easy start. It was a tough deal to play for him. And then the other stuff about Herb Brooks is it's all true, the stuff. Another, you know, later in that training camp, I think he walked by me and he said, "The legs feed the wolf, Chorske, the legs feed the wolf." And then he'd come back the next day and he'd say, "Did you figure it out? Did you know what I meant?" "Yeah, Herb, I know what you meant." So honored to have played for him. And you know, and the other story I want to make sure that it's worth telling is that I played for him in Pittsburgh, but my dad got cancer and I took a leave of absence to go be with my dad, because they said he's got 3 months to live. Long story short, we watched the Penguins in the playoffs through his illness, and he passed away towards the very end of the Penguins' run in the playoffs, and they lost in the second round, I think. Well, I remember giving the eulogy, and I looked out, and it was only 3 days after the playoffs, and Herb Brooks was in the church, was in the audience. And so he had made a concerted effort to get back and come to the funeral, which I thought was pretty amazing. And he didn't talk to me before. I don't know if he even talked to me after, but I looked out and I saw him. Meant a lot after him being so hard on me at the other time. So that kind of tells you the kind of person he was.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, like Herb Brooks, for you, Herb played, participated and wanted to play on the U.S. Olympic hockey team, and he was one of the last players cut, if not the last, I believe, in 1960. Mm-hmm. You also tried out for an Olympic team, and I'm not trying to bring back bad memories, but you were one of the last players, if not the last player cut.
Yep.
I'm sure that was some disappointment for you, but maybe that helped you with your NHL career going forward. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
It really did. Making the Olympic team in 1988 was definitely like a bucket list thing, right? I remember as a teenager, I wanted to play for the Gophers, And this was '85, and it's 5 years removed from the Miracle on Ice. So I want to play in the Olympics, and then I want to play in the NHL. You know, you have this like perfect plan, and I almost got to that Olympics in '88, but I was the last player cut, and I had earned it, if you will. I wanted it so bad and was slumping a little bit, and I kind of choked. So it was tough to have that conversation with the coaching staff that I wasn't going to be going into the Olympic Village. But I did come back, and with kind of newfound resolve that I was going to go on and make it to the NHL, and I did feel a lot more motivated. And I came back and played one more year at the University of Minnesota. Ran into another disappointment. We got to the national championship in St. Paul. You might remember, we lost to Harvard in overtime. So in a matter of less than a year, I got cut from the Olympic team and lost the national championship in overtime. So two pretty devastating events in a hockey player's young life. But it did motivate me to go on, and I think if we weren't sitting here and I didn't have a Stanley Cup ring on, I'd probably feel a little differently. But there was some success to come afterwards, so
Absolutely.
it did help drive me.
Fantastic. Let's move past those disappointments to
Yeah.
the Stanley Cup. 1995, you win the Stanley Cup with the New Jersey Devils. You reached the pinnacle of professional hockey. Mm-hmm. What was that season like?
Well, the season was interesting. There was a lockout, so it was a little bit of a shortened season. The year before, we had gotten to the Eastern Conference Championship, so we're playing to go to the Stanley Cup, and that series goes 7 games, and in the 7th game it goes to double overtime, and we lost that game. So to come back the next year and make it to the Stanley Cup was a big feat because we had gotten so close the year before. What I tell people, what I remember most about it was the camaraderie that we had. This was a team that evolved over the course of the 4 years I was there and became a really close unit. I thought you don't win a championship unless everyone has mutual respect and kind of pushes each other, or they have their back when they need to, and everyone had a role, and everyone appreciated the role that player did, and the star players appreciated the role players, and the rank and file guys appreciated that the star players, how they treated them, and we just had a lot of synergy kind of going on with that team, and that's how we ended up winning. Another, I guess, memory of it is when you get to hoist the Stanley Cup, or when the buzzer goes off, at some point you realize that it wasn't just the goal of that season or of my professional career. It was kind of the goal of my whole life to that point. Ever since you're 5 or 6 years old and playing hockey, you kind of dream about winning the Stanley Cup, and when it all of a sudden happens, it's pretty surreal and hard to imagine.
Well deserved too.
Oh, thank you.
A lot of our viewers may not know this, but besides the Stanley Cup, the cup itself being such a nostalgic and special trophy, probably the most special trophy in all of sports, arguably.
Yeah.
You had the cup. A tradition for the players and the management staff is each person gets to have the cup for one day. Mm-hmm. Tell us what you did with your day with the Stanley Cup, if you remember it.
I do. I was lucky. I actually ended up, Neil Broughton was on our team and was living he lives in Wisconsin. He had it before me, and I think he had a little barbecue picnic thing over in River Falls. And he got done pretty early, and the Cup Guardian, they had a Guardian that goes with it. And the Guardian gave me a call and said, hey, I can be there a day early. I'm done here. And so he came halfway through the day, so I had like a day and a half. And so I had an extra evening with it, and it's a trophy that's really, once you have it, you want to share it with everyone. So that's kind of what ends up happening. There's impromptu parties, or you can there's a bar and grill in St. Louis Park called Bunny's Bar and Grill. A little plug for them maybe, but that's where my parents would go watch me play, because at the time they didn't have cable, and that's where the satellite was that they could go and watch our games. And the owner, Gary, was willing to always set aside a table and put the games on so that they could watch our games. And so when I had the cup, he said, hey, can you swing by? And I'll never forget walking into that bar and grill with the Stanley Cup, and no one knew it was coming, and it's just an instant party. I mean, people were calling their friends from payphones, I think. There wasn't that many cell phones in '95, but he jokes, he says, yeah, the nearby store sold out of the instant cameras, right? Because there weren't phone cameras then either. But so had it for a couple days. I did have a reception at the Calhoun Beach Club with all my friends and family and relatives, and apparently all of their friends and family and relatives too. It was a pretty big deal. And then we ran around downtown and stayed out past our bedtime at the Loon Cafe. And
Do you know how many beers fit in a Stanley Cup trophy?
I don't know exactly the number, but you don't want to fill it up too much. You don't want to spill too much. So.
I understand.
And, you know, with champagne, it fills up with a lot of people eat cereal out of it, ice cream sundaes. I think they put dog food in it and let their dogs eat out of it. There's all kinds of things that go on with the Stanley Cup, and the stories are legendary.
It's been on some pools too.
Bottom of pools, it's sunk. It's yeah, the stories are. It got left. That's why now
You
there's a
sound like you've
Guardian.
been at some of those parties.
Yeah, he's probably heard, but that's why they finally sent a Guardian with it, because it's such an iconic trophy. They finally understood, hey, this is the NHL's premier, brand or icon, trademark. They said we can't have people leaving it on the corner of a, downtown saloon corner or something. So
You also brought the Stanley Cup onto the David Letterman show after you won the Cup in '95.
yeah, that was kind of a fun call to get too. We were still in New Jersey, and they said, hey, David Letterman called, and they want to know if you want to come on the show. And so we had a group of us, you can see there, and we came out first with the top 10 list, and then they said, hey, we want you to come back out and pour some coffee into his cup, and we're going to refill his coffee. So it was such a hit that he had us come out for an encore, and at that time, that was probably one of the cooler things that got to do because of the Stanley Cup, was go on the David Letterman show.
Neat experience for sure.
Yep.
Not many people can do that.
No, and I remember Diane Lane, if you know who that is.
Yes.
She's kind of an attractive actress, was the other guest, and we were either coming up the stairs or going down the stairs to our green room, and she was going up for her appearance, and you're just like starstruck a little bit when you see a famous actress go by, and again, you're thinking, wow, this is pretty cool to win the Stanley Cup. You get a lot of good benefits.
She was probably saying the same thing about the Devils team as well.
I don't
or
know.
you.
I don't know. New Jersey Devils weren't that cool at the time. It wasn't until after you win a couple cups. But.
Well, in those 11 plus years that you played in the NHL, you played against some of the best that ever played the game. Wayne Gretzky, number one. Mario Lemieux, number two. We could go on and on about names. Even Neil Broughton, who was your teammate.
Mark
one of the
Messier
greatest.
is another name.
There you go. So just thinking through that, who in your mind were the best players, and why were they the best players?
Yeah, I mean, there'd be a whole group of them, and you mentioned some of them. Wayne Gretzky, because of how he could operate with the puck and distribute it to his teammates and line mates, and he had a lot of good players around him. Mario Lemieux was really talented, skilled, but also like 6'4", and I remember if you tried to muscle him, he could handle that. He could out-muscle you back. You couldn't knock him off his feet if you tried. And Mark Messier was like one of these consummate bulldog type leaders that you didn't fear him, but you knew you were in for a long night if he was really on his game, and if you made him mad, it was you wanted to be careful with that, because he might just pump him up even more. And there's a legendary game he had against us in New Jersey, and the year before we won the Cup, he predicted a win and he delivered with a hat trick. And so stories like that are legendary, and he's a legendary Hall of Fame type player. Patrick Waugh was a great goalie. Our own goalie, Martin Brodeur, was pretty famous at the end of his career. But really, it was an honor, and some nights you felt privileged to be playing against the best in the game, and that's, I think, what you'll hear athletes talk about when they leave the game. It's either camaraderie with their teammates in the locker room and on the road and in the bus and everything, or the ability or privilege to compete against the best in the world. It's awesome.
There is a day in the career that every professional athlete has when that career comes to an end. Sometimes it's by choice, sometimes it's by somebody else's choice. For you, when did you know it was time to hang up the skates?
Well, when there wasn't a contract offered to me anymore. But I had played 11 plus seasons, and so, and you know, as your career goes, there are some other indicating factors, you know, whether your performance and your ability to play is starting to tail off, injuries. But again, it's mostly what the perception is in the marketplace, and if someone wants to keep paying you to play, or they'll say, well, you have to go here or there, and you just have to, you know, it's different for each player. And I always thought I would maybe go play in Europe, because I thought there's some really good professional leagues. You can live and play in Switzerland or Sweden or Germany, and it's a couple games a week, and it's a pretty good lifestyle. But when it came to the end of my career, I'd played enough in the NHL enough that I had a good long career. But some of my friends said, well, do you think you're going to have to work after hockey? And I said, yeah, I think I'll probably still have to go to work. I got, you know, another 60 years to live, and I don't have 60 years worth of money to support me and my family. So they said, well, if you're going to have to go to work and you're 32 years old and you've played already for 10 or 11 years and you've won a Stanley Cup, maybe you should start pursuing that next career. And so that weighed into it too. There really wasn't an offer, and I could have gone to Europe, but at that time, really my circle of friends and people that I was kind of networking with said, it's probably time to start focusing on your next career.
Interesting. We have about 2 minutes left in this episode, Tom. It's been fascinating to hear your stories and all that. And I think for me, you know, having followed your career in college and at the NHL, and knowing you for a lot of years, you have a high integrity rate. And I want to say that to all the viewers, that whatever you do, you've tackled with class and professionalism. But I think I have to think one of the most proudest moments for you, you touched on it just briefly earlier, you are a hockey dad now. You were a player all those years. Now you're a hockey dad for a daughter and a son who have budding careers ahead of them. With about a minute now to go in this episode, tell us how that feels, and what stirs through your mind when you're watching your son and daughter play hockey.
And another son. I can't leave out our youngest son. He's 12. He's a peewee, and he's starting to kind of get a little more fire for it too. But you know, watching your kids play, and as a former player, it's been a little tricky, because you know I can evaluate their game pretty with a lot of expertise, and they don't really like to hear that. But at the same time, they kind of know I'm right. So we've had to balance that part of just being a parent and enjoying them playing versus, hey, why don't you fix this about your game or do that? It'll be better. And I've gotten better over the years with it, and now I'm not coaching them. I don't even drive them to the rink. So it really, you show up and you buy your ticket and you sit down in the stands, and they're good enough hockey players that I can just sit and enjoy their successes, really. And I'm going to have fun with the younger one too, and just not coach him and watch him, and hopefully he grows a love for the game as well, and we'll just support him the way parents should.
Terrific. Hey, Tom, thank you so much for being on Behind the Game today. It's been a treat.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it a lot. I looked forward to it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you for watching Behind the Game.